So welcome everybody. So my name's Ian Groves. I'm one of the partners at Syamic, and Syamic is a specialist SIAM consulting and training company. And I'm here today to talk about SIAM training specifically, and to ask the leading question as to who needs it. And hopefully, if you like this presentation today, we'd ask you to follow us on LinkedIn, and we've just got the link to our page there on LinkedIn. And also just to reinforce here that we are an HM government G-Cloud 12 supplier, and also we're on the digital outcomes framework. So we're very experienced across public sector, but also the private sector too. So anyway, let's explore this a little further. So first of all, what is SIAM? I know we're all attending a SIAM focused conference, but often we make the mistake of launching straight into the detail without talking a little bit more about what service integration and management actually is and what it means to us, Syamic. So we've put a little simple sentence here, and it I think very accurately describes how unique SIAM is. So it's about creating a unique set of management practices which offer structure, culture, principles, and practices for managing a multi-service provider environment. And there's a number of key points there. I think it's about the management practice. So again, SIAM, we're not particularly wedded to any other frameworks. We complement, but we don't have to apply a standard framework. But it is also about really delivering a multi-service provider environment for the customer, and that's key. So SIAM goes beyond, I think, just trying to simplify the supply chain. I think in the past, SIAM has been seen as a silver bullet, the answer to all of the complexity and challenges that customers face when they're trying to manage multiple suppliers. But without having the right frameworks in place, then that doesn't really work, and it doesn't add the value or indeed the return on investment that the customer is looking for. So for us, put simply, SIAM is about effective governance across both services and the projects that the customer wants to deliver. And another key point is about having a clearly defined tooling strategy. So something this is often overlooked, and that's why we really promote the value of training within a SIAM environment, because you need to make sure that your tooling strategy in place and is complementary to the future. It's also about measurement and the reporting and assurance of end-to-end service performance. And now that is the key difference within a SIAM model, is end-to-end. So classically, we're used to measuring individual performance for individual suppliers, but SIAM, we have to think in a different way, and we have to manage suppliers working together to deliver service, hence the end-to-end measure. And within a SIAM organization, we must have clear roles and responsibilities, not only for the customer, for the service integrator and service providers. And again, one of the biggest challenges we see with customers is this shift where in most cases there will also be a service provider within their own ecosystem, and that can be quite a challenge. And another key element of SIAM is about collaboration between all parties. So not just between suppliers, but between the supplier and the service integrator, and between the supplier and the customer. So that for us is what SIAM is. And of course, the final point is everything must be revolved around continual service improvement with suppliers, integrator and customer working together to deliver added value and future investment in the services. So just a useful, I think, synopsis there of what SIAM means. And now we can start to explore, well, why training is so important within the SIAM environment. So on the left here, we've listed a number of critical success factors that we see, and of course, how then the benefits of SIAM training address those. We'll take them in turn. So the first one, and I'll come across this point over and over again, really, is about having clear roles and responsibilities and delineation between those, between the customer, the service integrator, and the service providers. Everybody must understand their role. Not understanding your role is one of the biggest reasons for failure that I've experienced within a SIAM model. So if we have SIAM training embedded as part of the organization, as part of establishing a SIAM model, what that does, it drives clarity during that design phase. It allows clear definition of roles and responsibilities to be established from the very, very beginning of that SIAM journey. And the second one down here is about SIAM projects typically take a long, long time to progress, and sometimes it can be years before any noticeable or tangible change takes place. So if we use SIAM training as a way to help us to build and maintain buy-in, particularly across the senior stakeholders within the customer organization, but also to enable the organization to start to develop capability, that helps to keep momentum going, it helps people engaged, and to be quite blunt, it keeps the SIAM project at the top of the agenda to stop it fading away and stop it losing its traction. We also think that critical success for any SIAM model is to make sure that we have active knowledge and experience across all of the levels within the SIAM model. We describe it as being alive and kicking. We should be able to audit it, we should be able to see it, we should be able to feel it, and everybody should be speaking the same language. And later on in this presentation, I'll show where we think that SIAM training has a role in each of the 4 stages of the SIAM life cycle. Also, training brings a new perspective that we think is key to success. And also, again, externally delivered training, and that's where the role of Syamic or others like us can have a role, is we bring a level of professionalism because we're accredited in the material, and we avoid the limitations of somewhat traditional in-house courses, but it brings that outsider's perspective. And the final one that we think should never be ignored as a success factor is the role of organizational change management. It should be in place and it should be effective right the way through the SIAM journey. We often see that OCM, as we refer to it in short, is put in far too late. It's put in as a reaction. It's felt as though it's something that should be done because we have to do it, rather than fully investing in the value and the return that it gets, that we get if we do that correctly. So again, having that established throughout through the process of accredited training also helps just to mobilize the organization and allow individuals prepare for the change that's going to come. So let's have a look back to the global survey, SIAM survey of 2020, that was led by Scopism. And there's some interesting facts here. So the first one, so looking at those organizations that are planning to adopt SIAM, there's only 33% of that group have actually started on any foundation training. And when we talk about the SIAM Foundation and Professional here, we're talking about those that are related to the SIAM bodies of knowledge, both the foundation and profession. But only 33, and for SIAM Professional, only 13% have considered putting that training in place. And alarmingly, up to 64% of organizations have done no training at all. Which I think is a recipe for disaster personally, because you're looking there at low levels of training will increase the risk of failure through lack of adoption because people just don't understand it. If we then move to those organizations who have adopted SIAM, then there's a noticeable uplift there in the people who have been trained at a foundation level, but only a marginal increase in SIAM Professional. And we wonder why that is. Maybe it's because it doesn't have the same level of awareness or traction within the market. Maybe customers don't realize the true value of it yet. But it is worrying that there's not much of an uptake on the professional level as we would expect. Pleasingly, though, organizations that do sell SIAM consultancy, there's a much higher uptake there, 66% foundation and 38 professional. But again, we would like to see even more of that going on. And of course, at Syamic, we do practice what we preach, and all of our consultants are SIAM Foundation accredited, and also SIAM Professional trained. And also, we are accredited trainers for both foundation and professional courses as well. So I think just in summary, just a reflection here that largely it's what we describe as a lukewarm interest in SIAM training for organizations yet to start. And somehow we need to address that. I think if we did a similar analysis against perhaps ITIL, for example, we'd see a much higher level of adoption. So I think we need to understand why that's the case. And then, of course, why are we getting this higher uptake once organizations have started? Well, perhaps they're starting to see issues within their implementation. Perhaps adoption is low, lack of clarity over roles and responsibilities, and maybe not getting the true benefits of cross-supply collaboration that they're expecting to do. So a number of reasons, but again, I think there's much more to do in this space. Okay, so in the next set of slides, what I'm going to do now is just talk about those 3 layers of the SIAM model, and to describe there how we see the training overlaying to that. So at the first level, we have the customer layer, and this is the top. So the customer organization or the retained layer owns the SIAM model and the governance framework needed to operate that SIAM model. And it also owns a number of key, what we call artifacts, such as the SIAM strategy, the business case for SIAM, and the tooling strategy we mentioned earlier. Now, some of these things may get delegated into the integration layer, but they are still owned by this level. So we therefore see that at this level, we need a good grounding of SIAM professional training. And within the governance model and within the customer organization, there is, again, if you refer to the SIAM professional body of knowledge, there's a role which is called the SIAM governance lead. And it's essentially this lead, this role that owns the SIAM model throughout. And it may be the same that that's the sponsor, but certainly we should expect to see somebody in the customer organization who's responsible for it. And we fully believe that that person should have a SIAM professional grounding, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult and challenging for them to manage that SIAM model going forward and its implementation. At a foundation level, then we see again, there should be a wider circulation of people who are aware and trained. So SIAM Foundation is a less challenging course, of course, but it's therefore the audience is wider, and senior customer stakeholders, we think, should be able to go through this, because again, it gives them a good solid grounding of what we need in a SIAM model and what their role will be within it. As we widen out the shape and we go into more of a SIAM awareness, then of course we're saying that everybody in the customer organization that's impacted by the introduction of SIAM should be made aware. So we're not saying this is accredited or formal training, but there should be a course or a program of targeted communications that go out. And then this supports that overall ambition of broader communications to anybody in the customer organization that's going to be affected by this change. But we're also starting to push out the messaging towards providers and external stakeholders. So if we now look at the level down, so we've got the customer organization at the top. Now we're going to look at focus in that middle layer of the sandwich, which is the service integrator. Again, the same level of training or the same number of courses. We've got professional, building on foundation, awareness, communications, etc. And within the integrator, there are 4 possible sourcing options, and I'll explore that in a little bit more detail shortly. But in essence, the service integrator is responsible for the operation, the day-to-day operation of the SIAM model, and typically large elements of the governance framework. So some of that governance will still be owned by the customer, but in most cases, a lot of the governance is operated by the integrator. And again, we'll look at the sourcing shortly, but they do act as the customer's authorization. Even if they're an external body or they're part of the customer's organization, they must be separated. They must have a unique identity. And of course, they're responsible for the management of multiple suppliers. So when it comes to training, within the integration layer, there is a counterpart to the governance lead that we discussed in the previous slide around the customer strategic organization. And this is the SIAM operations lead. So they must have, in our view, experience and detailed SIAM professional knowledge of how to operate the day-to-day operations of a SIAM model. And there may be others in that integration function as well, such as senior service delivery managers. Now, these folks will be responsible for the management of the performance of suppliers, both individually, but across a cohort of suppliers as well. So they do need a lot of detailed knowledge in how to operate it. Within that integration layer, we'd also expect to see a number of process managers. So these could be ITIL, it could be ISO 20000, it could be non-ITIL processes. But again, we'd expect a number of those to be at a professional level, because they will be dealing with a lot of complexity, and they also need to understand how those processes fit in within the overall operation of the SIAM model. But broader than that, we'd also want to see quite a good spread here of foundation knowledge within the organization. And we believe that any service integrator model should really have all staff within that organization trained as SIAM Foundation as a bare minimum. So the final part of this puzzle is looking at the service providers themselves. So again, same focus. We're still looking at the role of training across these across the professional foundation, etc. And of course, within service providers, within a SIAM model, they are more numerous by default. And they are responsible for the delivery of the service to the customer and end users. And I think the key point for us to note here is that these providers have to operate collaboratively together, um, but also, as I mentioned before, they may be part of the customer organization. So therefore, getting customers and suppliers to behave all as the same as suppliers needs a little bit of education, needs a little bit of culture change, and needs some coaching. Within, of course, SIAM service providers as well, we'd start to expect to see contractual elements of SIAM starting to come into those. So expectations of how they would be expected to behave in a SIAM operating model, which for some may be completely new, may never have seen that before. And again, we're looking for collaboration across the all. So in terms of training, then we would expect service providers to probably have their own SIAM frameworks. Maybe if they're supplying just discrete clearly defined sets of services, they may not. But of course, many of the large outsourcing organizations also have their own SIAM story and their own SIAM offering. So again, we're not expecting them to conform exactly, but we'd need to make sure that there was a good level of SIAM knowledge in there. They may have some pre-existing foundation knowledge available, and that would be favourable. But I think what is really key for us is there's going to be a level of SIAM awareness training required that's relative to that customer organisation. They need to know how they're going to fit in to what may be an already established ecosystem of suppliers. It may be a greenfield introduction of them of suppliers to develop a model. So we might be at the very beginning of a customer's journey in towards SIAM. But regardless of where we are, each supplier will need a clearly defined onboarding process to welcome them into that SIAM ecosystem and to get them operational as quickly as possible. And of course, service providers have a role to provide information to the customer as well. So that it allows them to further message the introduction of that new supplier. Maybe it's the announcement via a communications program to make sure that everybody's aware of what's changing, when it's changing, and what's needed. So that's the three layers. So let's explore a little bit more now the four types of sourcing model for the service integrator and where training, or we see where training would support each of those models. So the first one we'll look at is that pure externally sourced service integration role. So this typically takes place where a customer organization either does not have the skills to run the integration function themselves, and indeed probably has no desire to develop those skills. So they're engaging with a provider in the marketplace to deliver that service to them. However, that aside, the customer organization is still need to going to change the way it operates to accommodate and to empower that integrator in the middle of that model. So we see the role here of external trading providers helping that customer organization to make those changes, but also it frees up the role of the integrator to focus on developing the SIAM model. So we're not just burdening them to train as well as delivering. We provide them some space to actually get on with the task in hand of standing up and operating that model. Conversely to that, of course, there's the purely internally sourced model. So this is where the customer themselves takes on the role of being the service integrator, and they should really look, I think, in our opinion, to bring that outside perspective into that. It's again, otherwise they're making an assumption that they already have the right skills, they have the right understanding within that in their organization to operate an integration model, and it's challenging. So I think the benefit of bringing in training really will help them, again, as a point we reinforce quite a lot, is making sure that roles and responsibilities are clearly defined between the customer and the part of the customer organization that will act as the integrator and the service providers. And also it's key for staff development as well. It will really enable the staff moving into those roles to have a good, clear pathway and career pathway within a SIAM model. Moving on then to the hybrid integrator model. So this is most cases where the customer has perhaps a longer term intent to develop its own internal service integration capability, but to date doesn't have the requisite skills or the capabilities in place. So it's looking at, it works with a partner in the from the market to bring and support and bolster their capabilities with external capabilities and skills. Now, again, we think this is probably the most compelling case for external training support, because we're wanting to make sure that both organizations are coming together and operating on a common language and with a hybrid in that hybrid model. So training will really support that two organizations to come together quickly to gel and deliver the best possible outcome and the best possible implementation. And the final one here is where we have a lead supplier as the service integrator. Now, interestingly, this is probably the least popular of all models within the market, and this has been evidenced over a number of years within the scopers and white papers that they were in the global surveys. But of course, the view from us is that a lead supplier doesn't necessarily mean that they're have expertise in service integration as well. So it might be that they've got a larger share of the rest of the services, and integration is part of what they do. So again, we believe here that training would really help both the customer and the integrator as to have clear separation between their role as the integrator and their role as the service provider. Really brings clarity. Okay, so in terms of training, I alluded to this at the beginning of the presentation as to where across the life cycle we should deliver the training. So we believe actually that's a complete life cycle story. So in the first part, where we're looking at discovery and strategy, so this is the first phase of the SIAM journey, SIAM life cycle. Having the right skills, having the right training in place will help us shape the future of the implementation of the SIAM model. So it supports buy-in for the SIAM strategy because we're educating people about what we're trying to do. People have the right expectations. It helps shape the governance model, the governance framework. And of course, we're setting up the governance framework early on. So by defining the right things at the right time and having the right structure in place helps us to manage the project and helps us to manage the quality and the outcomes. But also, having training up front will allow the organization to identify those real strategic drivers and critical success factors. Because if we don't know what we're trying to achieve and we don't know how we're going to achieve them, then we'll never know if we were successful or not. And having that auditable way of tracking your progress and success also further helps for the buy-in and the commitment across what can be quite a lengthy journey to implement the first part of the SIAM model. Within plan and build, this is where we're starting to enable the strategic elements from the previous phase. As I mentioned before, this is where we should start to put in place some of those contractual elements within supply contracts. So we're likely to be, if we're starting on a brand new SIAM journey, there's probably some compelling event that says we're going to have to start to procure new services from new suppliers. And having the understanding and the training and the knowledge to start to put those requirements into contracts really helps later on when we're managing the performance of that supply. So we're not saying that the contract becomes a blunt instrument to drive the behaviors. We're not saying that. What we're saying is it actually gives everybody a commonality within their contracts, that collaboration is expected, and it just drives the right behaviors. And it allows us to then develop the collaboration model. Also, we should be starting to look here about enabling performance management, which is aligning to our tooling strategy. So again, good design, good principles, good thinking ahead really helps us as we go forward. It avoids a lot of the pitfalls that people fall into SIAM as they start to implement, which of course is the next stage. And in implement, this is where, although organizational change management should have been running as a heartbeat all the way through, this is where the rubber starts to hit the road. It gets really important that we understand how we're going to manage and help and support both individuals and suppliers and members of staff, etc., on board into the new environment. And of course, in some cases, there may be offboarding of older suppliers out of the model. So we need to be mindful of that. So OCM will help with onboarding new members of staff. So again, training here with SIAM will help for those new members of staff. They'll help them to understand their role. For the integrator, allows them to understand their role. It allows them to have clear boundaries between the customer organization and the providers. And also for new service providers, there'll be an element of training here that helps them quickly and effectively start to deliver value into the overall SIAM model. And finally, of course, we get to run and improve. And as we mentioned before, an externally sourced integrator should bring SIAM skills and knowledge and experience to the customer organization. But actually, the support of external training organizations such as Syamic helps the service integrator to focus on the tasks of establishing the SIAM model. So you can see here we've got a very cyclical model. And of course, this doesn't end for it is a life cycle approach because throughout the life cycle of the SIAM model, there will be changes to suppliers, there'll be changes to services. Things will happen that this model needs to continually be reviewed and adapt and be fit for purpose going forward. Okay, so let's quickly look at some of those benefits of hiring external trainers. So, a key for us, I think it does bring that impartiality, it brings that outside perspective. It allows us as external trainers to provide a wealth of experience from across other business sectors, which we think also enriches the learning experience for all. It, of course, enables accreditation and auditable staff development. It supports that. Um, but also, and key for us, that we are as trainers, we're actually active practitioners as well. So we're able to enrich that learning through a number of different other experiences we can share. We can we have real world examples. You know, we've got some of the scars that we've seen through SIAM implementations, so we can help individuals and organisations just to get to avoid some of those errors and don't make the same mistakes. Of course, now we have a range of e-learning opportunities available as well. So not all classes need to be delivered in the classroom, and they don't need to be done in a fixed number of days. So, for example, we're able to provide training over 30 days or 60 days via our portal with examination as well. And of course, in the last year or so, we've seen a massive change here and shift towards virtual classroom training, which of course is cost effective because people aren't away from the business, they're not traveling, and also it removes geographical boundaries. So I recently ran a SIAM Professional course where we had people from Belgium, South Africa, from the UK, and all really coming together. I mean, there is of course challenges with that, but I think there is a great potential to continue to deliver virtual classroom training. And again, if you look at our LinkedIn page, there's an article on there that we wrote about how the pandemic and how COVID-19 has perhaps changed the classroom forever. If you were interested in taking a look at that. So in terms of what are the benefits for the customer organization, so again for us, one of the key benefits is it gets everybody within the SIAM model that's affected to a common level of understanding about what the core elements of a SIAM model are. It also underlines the importance of SIAM governance framework. This is one of my key areas that I always focus on is making sure that we have governance in place, that the customer understands their role, and we have clearly defined roles and responsibilities across the SIAM ecosystem as well. The other area where we think training really benefits the organization is it gives clarity over supplier and performance management across multiple suppliers. I think most of us that have been in service delivery management for a long time understand how to manage and deliver a supplier individually, but when it comes to managing a group of suppliers collectively, it's a very different set of skills. It's a very different approach, and it takes a little while to get into. And I think therefore having the training and the confidence that you know what you're doing really makes a difference. And the final point here, I think, is that it mitigates the risk of failure. Having a good training program, having a good level of skills across the organization just takes away some of that risk around the failure of a SIAM model. Because as I said before, one of the biggest challenges is a lack of clarity, a lack of clear defined roles and responsibilities is one of the biggest barriers to success within SIAM. And if then we look at the individuals for the employees, well, hopefully training keeps them excited and engaged. So effective training should be interactive. It should look to capture their attention, but also it can be a great advantage to the organisation when they're looking to recruit staff. So mostly within SIAM, especially if we're developing an internal capability and function, we're going to probably need to recruit new staff. So by having a good, effective training program can be quite attractive to potential employees, especially if you're working in areas of the country where recruitment is a challenge. You need to do everything you can really to make that most attractive. We also see that training will promote initiatives across the ecosystem as well. So once we get into the operating model, having joint training programs is a great idea. Bring suppliers together, bring the customer, bring the supplier, bring the integrator together, and do some ideas generation. Have some workshops where you're actually building solutions together. So again, if we're looking at building collaboration, getting people working together and training together is not a bad idea. Also about encouraging collaboration and communication. So, of course, SIAM, one of the key tenets of SIAM is promoting collaboration. Well, if we're able to incorporate collaborative activities into, establishing early supply, what we call here cross-supplier bonding, through an implementation, through some training, it just improves satisfaction, it supports communication, and ultimately, what we're trying to do here within any SIAM model is ultimately deliver better service performance. So if the sum of the parts are greater, then it's a truly successful SIAM model. And finally, it employs employee retention, improves employee retention. A lot of employees frequently cite when they leave an organization that a lack of professional development and training was one of the main reasons that they left their job. Okay, so nearly there. So in terms of top tips for us to succeed a SIAM implementation, well, the first one is for us, it's clear it's never too early to consider organizational change management. And it's key. Just develop a plan, act upon it, review the feedback, and refocus. And if we don't keep that alive, then we're guaranteed that something will not go as effectively we want it to. We should be listening, we should be seeking feedback and making sure that everything and individuals are clearly communicated to and understand their role. We should promote SIAM adoption and buy-in through training. So we should have regular communications programs, but we see that training is one of the most powerful motivators and powerful ways of getting people to rapidly understand and feel comfortable in their new roles. We should never put somebody in a position where they don't know what they're doing, but we're putting them into a role to do it. We should have the proper training in place. And also be honest about your organization's SIAM capabilities. As we say here, somewhat tongue in cheek, but there's no shame in seeking out external expertise. But there really isn't. Again, it's about focusing on what your core capabilities are. If you know that these aren't core to your organization, you want to develop those skills, then of course you should bring in external expertise to help that. It may, I think otherwise it becomes a false economy because you'll be able to more rapidly move forward and you'll be able to seed the right skills across the organization. And one of the other ones for us is clearly establish the role of the service integrator and also pay particular attention to the choice of sourcing models. So when we say sourcing model, that was the formal models I described earlier and how they might be pertinent to individual situations. But once you've fixed on that model, be very, very clear that you know how to make sure that the role of the integrator is both understood by the integrator themselves, but also all parties within that ecosystem understand the role of that integrator and know where the customer's role starts and end and where the supplier's role starts and end. Otherwise, if you don't have those clear lines and those clear boundaries, things get very blurry and then the role of the integrator really becomes obsolete and you've lost. And finally, don't underestimate the level of cultural change required when you're looking to establish a SIAM ecosystem. It really, really is a big shift. There's going to be a lot of potential changes to individuals. There's going to be a lot of changes to suppliers. We're going to have more complexity in our sourcing approaches, and people maybe have been in roles for a long time. They're going to need some support and help that. And we believe that training provides that overall underpinning and common framework and common language for all. Okay, so just in closing, just a little bit more about Syamic. So we can provide the following via our portal. So we're able to deliver SIAM Foundation training. We've got ITIL 4, COBIT 5, and also the Verisim suite as well. But as I mentioned before, as active SIAM practitioners, we can also provide the SIAM Professional training, and that's either done in the classroom, course challenging currently as we speak, but we can deliver that course virtually and have done that on a number of occasions very successfully. And we can also provide tailored and group training on request. So if you wanted to find out more about that, please visit us at siamic.com. And again, we'd really encourage you to follow us at LinkedIn, where we regularly post information about things that we're seeing changing in the market around SIAM training. But also we do look to publish some interesting articles as well on a regular basis. And in closing, for Service North this year, we've got a number of offers. So as part of the conference, we're going to be giving away 2 of our SIAM Foundation courses with 60 days of access. So please visit us at our booth and enter our prize draw. Again, if you've already done the SIAM Foundation course, doesn't matter. You can gift this to someone else. If you win it and successful, we don't mind. We just got 2 of those available, and we'd love to see that being taken up. But also as part of the show, conference, we've got £100 off discount code, which anybody can use across our website for any of our foundation courses. And the code you'll see there is SY8100. And we've left that to be valid up until the end of this calendar year. So I'll pause there now and for any questions.